We'll call this meeting of the Facilities Committee to order. All three board members are present. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? So all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? I'm not seeing any public comments. And therefore, we'll go right into number 5, which is the projects report for 21-22.
I'll jump in quick. First of all, thank you to the board members for squeezing this in between 5:30 and 6 o'clock. We do have a budget committee meeting tonight at 6, so we will make sure we keep this meeting brief. Rebecca, would you mind pulling up the document that says capital projects? So this is the list of capital projects that the facility committee approved for the 21-22 school year. We've shared this with you before at various committee meetings as to where the projects are at. Audrey continues to update this as prices and information comes in across all of these various projects. Whatever is shaded up near the top are projects that the process has been completed. The projects down below, the white ones, are in various stages of work. But what we really wanted to talk to you about tonight is a request to defer a project and to substitute it with a different project. So down at the bottom in blue, you can see the playground drainage at Prairie that we're requesting to defer that. And you can see the emergency infrastructure work at the high school is a request to substitute that work in. So please note that we're not asking for additional funds. We're just asking to swap projects. So the infrastructure work at the high school is all related to the fact that as an organization, we have continued to experience the loss of internet access and network access across our buildings, which puts us in a very difficult spot as an organization. As an example, our telephones are all connected to the IP system. Just one example. So we're all connected through the high school. And one of the things that we're trying to dive into is a greater understanding as far as the generator that's at the high school and what areas of the high school, specifically the IT infrastructure, that need to be connected to that generator that currently are. So we've got a couple different issues going on. One of them is the closet where the internet access comes in at the high school from WISCnet, basically from Madison. And then there's the IT room itself, whether it's the HVAC equipment or other equipment in that area being protected by the generator as well. And then separately, Rick Franz, our tech director, is working on a secondary source of internet into the organization as a second project besides the one that John and Audrey have been working on. So our request is to swap out one project, replace it with another. I'm going to just ask John to just explain a little bit the work he's done in this and why that has kind of replaced the Prairie project as a priority. So John, you mind jumping in?
Not at all. So I had actually been out to Prairie and done some work with those guys out there to try and mitigate some of the water drainage through that playground. That was an issue, was the water running from the asphalt surface through the playground, creating some divots and ditches and the chips and so forth. So with some work I did out there earlier in the year, it seems to be better. So therefore, with this infrastructure issue around our internet and telephone systems, I think the Prairie one can be deferred for now because it's been better. And some of the components that we looked at, Steve touched on, there's actually 2 closets at the high school. One is where the internet comes into the building. There's another closet near the switchgear vault, actually in the switchgear vault, that houses some SIP trunks from the telephone company. So more phone lines. And then, like you said, air conditioning and other stuff in the data center itself. So I've worked with our electrician our internal electrician and IT to identify these needs, and we have quotes on today, so we're ready to go. And that'll make our internet circuits for the whole district more resilient, so that will impact this building as well.
Whenever we have a power outage,
That's correct.
if you look over the last probably 2 years, and probably at 4 different times, we've had outages that have impacted us with the internet, which is obviously how all of our work gets done out here, particularly in payroll, bills, etc. It also has an impact with regards to when your kids in school, it knocks out the phone line. We had to get creative to make sure we have a way to communicate. So those are all tied into these different pieces. And I think this is a really important issue for us to address.
Questions from the committee?
Does Prairie agree with you that the problems are sort of taken care of, like the better, or what did you do to make it better?
I spent an afternoon out there with the rake and a blower and mats and looking at the area firsthand and working with my team members out there to try and make the area better. So, but specific to your question, no, I haven't gotten with Dean on it or anything.
I would say district-wide, power outages are a high stress issue for every single building. You know, once you lose internet, you lose instruction. So to me, that one's just got to be. Address that piece of it.
What's the, did you say, Steve, you're bringing in a second source of internet?
Yeah, so we're working on bringing in a second source of internet. So as an example, if anything ever happened where the high school itself was damaged due to any type of emergency, again, the entire district would go down and we'd be non-functional here. So Rick Franz is currently researching whether it makes sense to have a line come right out to Bethel Circle or perhaps at a building. And before Herb left, Herb Hobrook was working with Charter as a secondary internet source to come into Prairie. But now Rick Franz, since taking over that role, is doing some research on his own to try to determine whether this location makes more sense or whether WISCNet or Charter. So he's diving into the redundant internet issue, which would help if there was ever a major issue at the high school. And what we asked John to dive into is to address the power outage problems that we've continued to run into. So we're actually working on both paths to try to come up with a longer term solution.
When will you bring in the redundant internet?
So
Next year? Or?
we'll be closer than that. Rick has been working with a number of different vendor partners and he's continuing to do it. At this point, we're not proposing a solution that would increase our current budgeting. We'd be looking at just spending some of the funds differently within the IT department. The reason why this always gets brought before the facility committee is the facility committee always approves all of the projects on this list.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the school board policy, expenditure at that level, Randy could approve. So $25,000 and above is what actually has to be approved by the school board. But we have a longstanding practice of always bringing the projects to this committee, even if they're not $25,000, which is why we're doing so this evening. So even though Randy could approve this, our practice has been to review the projects with this committee to get your recommendation about switching projects around or making changes. So that's why we're presenting it tonight.
We've always brought the whole project, we approve each individual project, and that's just changes.
Take the motion to approve.
Second.
Any further questions or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Next is the custodial question.
So we want to jump into some discussions on staffing. And we want to talk about where we are today. And then, of course, we want to talk a little bit about the longer term vision as well. Rebecca, can you bring up document number 1 for just a moment? So this is your custodial maintenance team in document number 1. We're excited to share that other than our weekend custodial position, which has traditionally been a position that's been funded out of our community service fund for community use on the weekends, we're at full staffing. It's taken a tremendous amount of work for, you know, the leadership team and the facility maintenance area to get us where we are today. We do want to thank the board members for supporting that second pay increase for this group earlier this year. We feel that has made a significant impact. In the 20+ years I've worked in Waunakee, we've never had a group receive 2 increases like this in 1 year. The board was responding to our effort to become fully staffed, and we're pleased to share with you that it has worked. So we're in a really good spot now. We have all positions filled. We do have a retirement coming in January, right? So we're working on that one. We'll probably be getting that position filled sooner rather than later, but we're in a great spot. Anybody have any questions for the facility maintenance folks as far as where we're at currently with our staffing? If not, Rebecca, if I could ask you to go back to the attachments. And we're going to jump down to number 4 for a minute, the attachment number 4. Perfect. Thank you, Rebecca. So what I'm looking to do is just have a brief discussion. And I realize Jack and Dave have the history on this, and just going to share a little bit of the background with Ted. So we're going to go back pre-pandemic for a moment. When the facility committee was interviewing our architectural firms as well as our construction management firms, it was very important for the facility committee at that time to ask questions about our potential vendors on a variety of topics, but one specifically that the facility committee members continue to ask was, can we pull projects out of a referendum and manage them internally if we hire you to be our architect or our construction manager? And why that was important to the facility committee a couple of years ago was we knew we were going to have a decent size capital maintenance list. We knew we had the ability potentially to manage some of these projects internally at a lower cost than having the architect and construction management firm manage them. And it was important to the committee to make that verification when those partners were selected. Fast forward to where we are today, one of the dialogues that we were intending to have as the discussion was moving forward in the referendum was the discussion of internal management of facility maintenance projects. What I asked John to do was to talk with you for a few minutes about examples of some of the projects that were on the docket for the referendum that could be managed internally, and to then have the discussion as to whether or not that philosophy the facility committee was looking at 2 years ago is still our philosophy today. And if so, what steps do we need to take to position ourselves so that we can manage these projects? So I'm just going to ask John for a couple of minutes, and please understand this is not an exhaustive list. This is not all of the items on the list. I wanted John just to share you examples of things that are on the referendum list that would be able to be managed internally. So John, do you want to talk about this for a minute?
Sure. The original document that you see on the screen had some errors sent last week, so I just updated you with the fresh one, and the fresh one is also on screen. So thanks, Rebecca. Like Steve said, these are just examples of some of the items I pulled out of the existing long-range plan. And the first page, all the things on this first page are things that I feel we can handle in-house. And I just put a few examples from Arboretum, middle school, high school, and Prairie. Items like painting, carpet replacements, PA and intercom systems, security systems, elevator refurbishing, tile replacements, and so forth. I mean, these are things that I've done in the past and have managed even while I've been here at Waunakee. So not a problem to do some of these things, like Steve said, very little involvement for engineering or construction management or civil to get involved and stuff like that. So again, just a small sample of those items. On the flip side of the page, a few more items at Prairie are listed at the top there. And then mid-page, I added some examples of projects that I would need assistance with through construction management or engineering. For example, in civil, like if we did a parking lot and sidewalks out here at Bethel, that would be very time consuming for me. Roof work at the middle school and so forth. I don't have engineering background to know that would be in my best interest for us to do that. So again, just a brief example of some of the projects and some of their costs and where we're at with that.
So the intent at a high level behind this discussion was to really, I guess, connect with the facility committee members who were on the interview process several years ago and almost confirm is that plan that we were talking about a couple of years ago, one that you want to go back to? And if yes, then we want to have that dialogue about what we would need to do internally to position ourselves to be able to manage more projects. In effect, a referendum and capital maintenance projects coming in a referendum would be our typical capital maintenance request that we showed you in the previous agenda item on steroids, right? It's taking that list of $500,000 and ending up with a list of $5 million or $10 million. And the rationale for not having, let's say, either Epstein or Vogel or both of them take on these tasks is really related to cost, right? There's always an additional fee for an architect. There's an additional fee for a construction management firm, and you can do the math on seeing what those fees would be for large scale projects as opposed to internally managing them ourselves. And if you go a little further back in the district history, we did something just like this, but we hired out what we called was an owner's rep position in our referendum projects in the past. The individual's name was Tom Knack. It was a very expensive, proposition. We were spending well more than, $10,000 to $15,000 a month for just a couple of days of service each week. And it was a very, very expensive situation. But we have always known we need some assistance if we were going to manage projects ourselves. But I guess I'm going to turn it back to Jack and Dave, who were on this committee back when we interviewed these partners, and just try to talk through, are you wanting us to try to be prepared for what we thought we were going to be prepared for? Or would you prefer that we not keep walking down this path, basically?
That's the question is, do you want us to start to take on more of these projects and manage them? And if we're gonna do that, we need some help internally to be able to free up John and Audrey to be able to do more of that and the differential between the cost savings. Generally, what the concept is.
Right, and we're gonna pay someone to manage the projects, whether you're paying Epstein, Ewan, and Vogel, or whether you're paying an internal person, someone is being paid to manage these projects. it just was the belief of the facility committee a couple of years ago that it would be less expensive if we did it ourselves. But then it ties into the, I'll call it draft job description that we included as the attachment number 5, which is just a high level of what would it look like if John was able to focus on projects and we had an individual managing the day-to-day aspect of the custodial maintenance team, meaning doing things like hiring custodians, training custodians, working through the day-to-day HR issues. It's absolutely not possible to take a position like John and say you're going to do everything that you're doing right now and manage X $1 million worth of projects. So we're wanting just that high level discussion on where do you see this going? Do you see it instead going the Epstein, Vogel route? Or do you see it going an internal discussion about managing as many of these projects as we can?
First, I'd like to ask, there's 2 position descriptions in there. And you're saying if we decide to go that route of doing it internally, you want both those positions?
So the second position that's in there for discussion is just a unique take on custodial time that I wanted to just discuss with you. It can completely be unrelated to this discussion.
Okay. And there was no budgetary impact for that job description you provided. What would you see it as being funded?
Right, great question. So what would the long-term scenario for this would be? The referendum question that would be coming in November would include support for the position so that we would be able to manage the projects internally. It's the same concept that we applied years ago with the additional support at the intermediate school when we built the new intermediate school. The second principal position at the intermediate school was funded through the referendum itself.
As part of the operation.
As part of the
Yes.
operational referendum.
So
But the
what-
board said, we need to plan ahead for this and we need to get this going.
How much are you seeing this position be?
We didn't dive into that because I wanted to have the discussion about whether or not you even wanted us to go down that path. This was just more of a, do you still believe in that concept? Do you want us to flush this out further? Do you want us to find examples of pay ranges? So this was meant to be a first discussion. Do you want us to go deeper or do you want us to instead not go down this path, basically?
Other questions? Or comments? Or-
It's got up this list, it looks like this, looks like everything's gonna happen in year 4. So it's 4 years out. Is that what I'm reading here?
No, if
4
it's,
years behind,
it's 4 years behind.
in a parentheses as a negative.
An illustrative diagram, just to show you the type. So for example, we could have Epstein and Vogel come in and do all of the carpet, but on top of the carpet cost is gonna be the design and all of their other, their markups. And so this is basically an opportunity to say, these are the type of projects that we can manage without hitting all of those markups.
Right.
We did a little bit of that in 2014 at the very end of that referendum. We've done some of that kind of work, like when we swapped out the lights in this room, Westfall came in, worked with them, and therefore you weren't working with the fire department. But when you go through those referendum projects, those maintenance projects are often then delegated off to our architect and our construction manager to manage that whole body of work. And that was part of what we had as part of our negotiations and discussions with that, with Epstein and with Vogel, was that we wanted the option to be able to pull things out that we manage ourselves to save on the overhead costs that we would pay them. And then through that that would help to kind of pay for kind of the position that Steve and John.
So we've had challenges hiring janitors. So basically what you would do is hire an outside painter. You know, what's your vision on doing this? And then you just kind of oversee that painting crew to say, yes, you did it well.
A great question, Jack. I would say when you look at, again, that example list that we put together, it would be John's role supervising the projects rather than, let's say, Vogel's role. And so those were examples of things that we pulled off the list that we would say, because we already negotiated with both firms that we could pull these things out of their contracts, we would have John manage them, meaning put together the specs that we want, these 10 rooms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. John would do the bidding, John would do the managing, instead of turning that over to Epstein and Vogel to run that process. In some of them, it may have been you would hire one but not the other, or you'd hire them both, or in some cases it would be none. But we have a long history of trying to tackle these projects in various different ways in the past. But it certainly was important to this committee a couple of years ago to try to take a close look at what could we do ourselves. And that was obviously part of the process. You know, John was hired, you know, a little bit before the pandemic came with a strong project management background. I know that was some of the thinking at that time, that John has the background and training for managing projects. But obviously you can't do the scope of what we're going to be bringing forward in November while doing the day-to-day type of custodial work. So it's just, what kind of a model do you envision us having internally for managing projects and managing custodians? Do you want to outsource that work to Epstein and Vogel? You want to try to do more of that work as much as we can ourselves? It's just two different approaches of really doing the same thing.
So you must have an idea of what the supervisor, so John just becomes a manager of projects? And then you hire a supervisor to do the maintenance?
So in the past, in our district, we have had 2 administrative roles in the facility maintenance department. In our past, we had an individual who was the director of maintenance who ran projects, and we had someone who managed custodial. We had a gentleman named Mike Brady who did that, and Kenny Derricks ran the buildings basically. So we've had that set up here before. And then we've also had a setup where we had a construction manager. We moved away from 2 internal people to 1 person and a construction manager. It's just trying to get a read as to where you think the best investment is for us to make in the long run. Should we be managing these projects ourselves over a period of time, or should we be contracting them out? Part of what I would like to do tonight is just to learn what kind of information would you like to know to help make this kind of a decision? What can we bring to you at a future meeting so you can have information in front of you to talk through this?
It sounds like another point, yeah, Jeff, is what's that custodial supervisor cost? Well, that's exactly, yeah, so basically, that's just, and I think we have to do some of the research on, but if it was 70 grand plus the roll off, probably a yeah. And so if you have kind of that type of a number, when you start managing some of these things, you come up with that pretty quick. When you start to add all those roll-ups the rest of the unit. That's kind of a point for those kind of dollars, we can do a better job supervising our custodians and then have John oversee the entire organization and manage some of these projects. By managing the projects, hopefully it also saves some dollars for our projects. That's the concept.
But when we first discussed this years ago about the idea of trying to internalize some of that project management. That's what we wrote into the job description when we did that last time. We didn't write in that we were then gonna hire another person to replace the person we had hired. Or half their job description is gonna be, it wasn't written as a two-person job description. And if it's about the stuff we're gonna do in the referendum, I'm almost reversing course, and I hate to do it, but if it's about that heavy workload, that's only gonna last for a couple of years. Now we suddenly have a person on payroll at $70,000 a year. That, what do you do after year 4? You know, if that's a 4-year referendum, once that referendum work is done, do we suddenly not have one person? Or is this a permanent thing that we've got to be able to compare the cost of that position versus the cost of this? I'm also a little disappointed, though, that we had this plan all along. We wrote the director of facilities position to do that. Now suddenly you're saying we have to add a whole nother position at the cost of the original director of facilities position.
Well, I think what we're saying, Dave, is there's a limit to what one person can do. And here's like an example. So the total scope of the maintenance projects that were discussed prior to the pandemic was in the $20 to $25 million range, right? Certainly you could not manage the day-to-day operations of a facility or our size and manage that, right? Is John able to manage the way we're set up right now and do $500,000 of capital projects? Yes, we're doing that right now. You saw the list. We're managing that. We're doing it. But if we were to peel off $5 million out of that $20 million and say, you can do that yourself, which is 10 times the scope of what we're currently doing, that's not manageable for one person. Could we do some of the projects? Sure. It just depends on the scope, right? And the direction that we choose to go. And there are some very large projects on that list. And like Randy was saying, if you just do the math on $1 million, just $1 million, and you're saving the architect fees of 6%, the construction management fees, you've paid for that position for 1 year. And the list was $20 million.
So look at it, to Dave's point, we're gonna get referendum dollars, right? So $20 million referendum, we probably do 5 to 10 million, by ourselves. After 5 years, we don't have the money to have that individual, do that heavy lifting and the bulk of that work, right? So now, the work is going to go down, and the workload is going to go down, and this person, his salary is going to go up. So
I think we have to see the number difference between that salary position and the amount you would save on the construction management. And the other thing is that you're right, you're talking $20 million worth of referendum, but are you going to do $20 million in a year? No, you're going to divide that out. If you divide it out farther, you're talking taking a $500,000 a year workload and making it $1 million, $1.5 million.
well,
Is that worth hiring a $70,000 person a year? Maybe not. But the cost could be exceedingly higher than if you divided that out over time or divided it out against a split between construction management and what we're currently doing.
I think there's pieces that we didn't grab, but when we did make the transition there, when John was hired, the conversation we had was we wanted the position to be able to take on more of those managerial projects, which he has. I mean, that's kind of, we've seen that shift since John has been here about trying to take on more of some of those things. It's right now, but we also had a conversation at that time. Now, we did not have a recommendation to hire 2 people, but we had the conversation at the time that we were making this shift, that we also needed to review the supervision of our custodians. because that is a huge part of what is taking away from the ability to manage some of the other pieces. If you look at like the 20-year plan, making sure we move those things forward and all of the other management aspects, that's the piece we're seeing, is that we're seeing that it's not congruent to be able to expect John to be able to do both of those.
But maybe we're going the wrong way. You're sitting here thinking of shifting off the custodial work. What if, when you look at the stuff we pay to architects and project managers, what if you went the other direction and said, what if we went and got a real construction project manager? You could pull everything off of the referendum side, not the new building construction, but everything outside of that. Like, for example, the stuff on the roofing and the concrete and the blacktop, we get that year in and year out. What if we could have a person who could really take that and save that percentage? Because those are much bigger dollars. And instead of hiring a supervisor for custodians at $70,000 to $100,000, you go hire a project manager at $100,000. Your cost savings would be huge on that flip side compared to going the other direction. Because then we could say all those things that we run into year after year, not just during a referendum, we'd always be able to save that percentage. Maybe that's a bigger savings direction to take a look at. Because I mean, I know our construction managers, they cost you maybe 100 grand a year, maybe 120, but heck, you're going to spend that just on the short little list you have right there. And I mean, we're doing roofing and blacktop every couple of years. And those are projects we say we can't do internally right now. Maybe we should consider, instead of going custodial, we go project management. Would that be a bigger dollar savings long term?
The big thing that we wanted to do was prompt the discussion,
Right.
right? Because a couple of years ago, that was important for us to have that discussion, for us to take a look at the most cost-effective and appropriate strategies for this large volume of work that was going to be coming. And we wanted to just have that dialogue. We appreciate your feedback. Randy and John and I will spend some time together thinking about what we could bring back to you to help prompt that dialogue. Because really, truly, there are a wide range. I mean, you're right, Dave. There's a range of the way this could be handled. Like I said, in the past, we've hired an owner's rep. There's a variety of ways. We just want to make sure we're having that dialogue with you so we don't get to the point where we've got this big list and we have no idea what we're going to be doing with it, right? We want to plan well in advance to know what our strategy is going to be. So
I think my big concern is that hiring a position that is short-term as a long-term position is obviously one focus. And then the other is, where is the best return on what you're putting into that position?
Right.
If that makes sense.
I mean, I would argue, I think that there's definitely a rise in workload with referendum and stuff, that's short term, but I think that the value it brings to the district is something that's long term as well. So I think we can bring those pieces down. Some of the options I would think.
So I look at the projects on here, they're basically carpet and painting, painting spec isn't gonna change. The carpeting spec isn't gonna change. You're gonna go back to the same people and give them contract, you could probably give a 3 to 5 year contract, and the spec is there, right? It's a matter of negotiating the price. And these people are gonna come in, you can say, hey, do this room, do that room. This is what we want done. They're gonna do their work. You come in and say, okay, sign off on it, and you're gone. These crews I don't assume need much direction other than making sure that they show up on time.
There's a lot of handling going on. This is about 1% of the list, the big list, so it's just a tiny portion. Keep in mind too, the description on the screen was the evening custodial supervisor. right now, the crews, the custodians go home and there is no evening supervision. So this person would help with the supervisory aspects, HR aspects, managing these 40-some employees in the evening as well. That would also help. I see it as a long-term in a right now situation, actually. I have to deal with Act 143, school safety. I'm dealing with energy grants, and there are lots and lots of things that I have on the back burner, which I could use this position a year ago in order to make me more effective with doing more project management work. I mean, the mobile at the middle school went great. Vogel helped us with some construction management for their piece, helping organize the civil a bit, doing the asphalt and some of the drainage aspects underground. I did everything else from the moving, the doors, the locks, the lighting, the network, the HVAC, the electrical. I did all that. So from that aspect, I think this position would be super valuable today and would be long-term.
So we don't want to rush this dialogue. We had intended to do a 30-minute meeting, squeeze it in between the 6 o'clock meeting with the hopes of bringing forward that Westfall work that we think is really critical to our organization. We wanted to share the positive short-term situation that we're fully staffed. And we want to engage in a discussion with this committee on that longer-term structure. So we appreciate getting that conversation started. I would ask that this committee meet again after the winter break, and we'll schedule a longer period of time, and we can throw some options on the table and keep this dialogue moving if that works for everybody.
Steve, I think what you have to do is say, okay, we're gonna get this referendum, we're gonna do X number of dollars, but then after that, it's gonna peel off to $500,000, right? And so you get projects for 5 years. You know, how does that person pay for himself? You know, going forward, you know, in that second 5 years.
Sure, absolutely. Yep, appreciate your feedback and thank you for squeezing this in.
Is there a
You guys
motion?
want to schedule a meeting
Do
already?
you want to schedule it now or? do you
We
want-
certainly can.
Too, have you looked at maybe making some type of supervisor, or is that how you're structured right now?
That's what
That's what this is.
that is.
But in the building supervisor that's supervising that staff, making sure that things are happening. You know, create the bump and pay for that. Would that be attractive as well?
I would say there's a range of options that we would like to explore with you to make sure we're set up properly for the long run. That really address those, you know, that core topic you brought up a couple of years ago of us managing as much as we can to really save those costs. So we'll bring that back because there's a lot here, and let's try to find a date where we can keep this conversation moving forward. That works for everybody.
So after the break, you're looking at what, the week of January 10th? Probably the first thing to consider.
The 10th is the board meeting, so do you want it before the January board meeting?
It's really bad before the 10th.
I don't necessarily see anything that would require it to be before the January, whatever works for the committee. You could look at
Cool.
17th,
The when?
17th, January 17th.
January 17th. That's Martin Luther King Day. All right, this is
And
school.
then is state education conference starting the 18th, just FYI.
Do you have something, is the 10th not a good week for you?
That's important.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the week of the 10th, we could do it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever.
I'd like to keep these things on Monday, so.
One thing we could do is I am going to be requesting the budget committee try to meet perhaps the week of the 3rd, and maybe we can pair these up together. Are folks available,
I can
you
do
know,
that.
the week of the 3rd?
fine with me.
Because Randy, I was gonna see if the budget committee could meet again somewhere in that time frame.
Demonstrate this picture of that it lines up with facilities.
Is it a specific day?
It doesn't matter.
What date works for you that week? Third is the first day back.
Any time,
Fourth, fifth, or sixth.
it doesn't matter to me.
We're free, I'm free on the second.
Might be a Packer game. Can't do that.
But what about the fourth?
Fourth.
Can you guys be ready for that?
Well, at least 2/3 of the budget committee is good with the fourth. Okay,
So we're for you, then?
which one do you want first?
So these are about.
I don't have a preference, whatever works for the board members.
Usually facilities is shorter.
Yeah, facilities at 4 and followed by.
Can you do it at 5? Facilities at 5, budget at 6.
That's fine.
Sounds good.
All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, stay for the budget meeting.
Thank you, John. Thank you, guys.